the Spirit. Open your Bible to John 8. Very simple message. John 8 and verse 31. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, he's speaking to believers now, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, this is widely quoted and known. Even the world makes use of that statement, and the truth will set you free. You know, remember a movie with Jim Carrey saying that. I thought, well, I don't think he got that from the Bible. I think he just heard it somewhere. But that's widely known, but I don't think it's fully understood. What kind of freedom? Freedom to run around, jump, dance, sing, have fun? Well, yeah, you can do that if you want. But there's two things that come to my mind in specific. The first being freedom from judgment. We didn't realize that we were all doomed until we got saved. We're all destined for destruction, for hell, unless we got saved. And so we were bound. We couldn't save ourselves. There was no way out. But God provided it and then told us about it. And so there's freedom from judgment. Jesus stepped in our place and took the judgment that was due me and stood in my place so that I could be free from that judgment. And now I'm born again and I'm going to heaven at the end of this life. That's a massive, massive thing. It's extremely important. And that's why Paul said, there's therefore now no condemnation, which means no judgment unto damnation. You will not be condemned to hell. For those who are in Christ Jesus, for the law of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. The law of sin and death is on every human being on this planet, unless they're born again. So, thank God that I'm free from the condemnation that's coming to those who have rejected the Lord. I appreciate that greatly. But there's another aspect to this that is what I think the Lord wants to really get across to you this morning, is that we're free from the limits of humanity, the limits of being human. See, that's, humans have these great capacities to do things. I understand that. But Jesus said, for them that believe, all things are possible with God. All things are possible with God. And so all of a sudden, those believers that know him and step in and know his word and become his disciple and so forth and continue in his word, the possibilities in your life get exponentially increased. And thank God for that. I got to tell you, never in my life ever did I think I would travel the world. Never. We think we know people. I don't even think my own children really fully understand my upbringing because I haven't talked a lot about it. But it was very, very, very difficult. My father was a raging alcoholic who was a mean drunk. He was violent. We didn't know what would happen from one day to the next. He never got drunk in the daytime, but every single night he got so plastered he would pass out. Many times there were raging fights between him and my mother, breaking glass, smashing things, throwing things. My father destroyed everything in my bedroom twice with a baseball bat. Came in and just tore the place apart. Thank God I wasn't in it. My mother was fully depressed and arrogant, so incredibly arrogant. She studied psychology and she thought she understood everybody on the planet, except herself, of course. And they divorced when I was quite young. And so, there was that. And forgive my French, but my mom nicknamed my dad that bastard. So anytime we were talking about him, that's how she referred to him. Never called him your dad or his name or anything. It was that bastard. So that's how I grew up, with this angry, bitter woman whom we were living with. And, when they separated, we kids went with the mother. And we were dirt poor. I mean, dirt poor. And I'm not exaggerating. If my feet grew more than one size in a year, it was just too bad. I got one pair of shoes every year. And stuff like that. I barely had clothes. I had 2 pair of jeans and 2 or 3 shirts. And so I would wash everything one day, so I'd have something clean for the next day, that kind of stuff. My mom, after she got divorced, she threw a children's cookbook to us. She said, "Here, y'all are going to have to cook your own food." So, okay, I remember the very first thing I made was called an egg in a frame. A fried egg in a round hole in a square piece of toast. And I lived on those for a while because that's what I could do. We had to clean our house. We had to cook our food. We had to wash our clothes. We had to do everything. She did nothing. She was trying to finish her education and go to work. But we were more than poor. We were so poor, I was embarrassed to have any friends over to the house. I just did, it was bad. So this is how I grew up, in survival mode. For my first 20 years on the planet were to survive. That's all I can think. I never had what I considered to be a good parental guidance on anything. I got slapped around and criticized every time I did something wrong. And only once in a while would my dad try to talk to me about something else. But my mother never did. And so they both remarried, and then they both got divorced again. So they both married and divorced twice. And the spouses they married after they divorced each other were both wackos. My dad married a woman who finally said to him, I want you to disinherit your children and give your money to my daughters. She had 3 daughters by many men. And that broke the straw of the back on the camel for my father. At that point, he had an eye opener and he divorced her. She flatly said, I want you to disinherit your children. And her reasoning was, well, they'll do well for themselves. They'll get along. They'll figure it out. Well, he refused. She divorced him and took almost half, I guess, of what he had in the divorce. So she hated us. She was a nasty woman. I lived with my dad for a while he was married to her. The only thing I could do was stay on the opposite side of the house to just stay away from her. One day she had one of her friends over in the middle of the day. They got raging drunk, and the friend came to my room and stood in the doorway and cussed me out for about an hour, screaming at the top of her lungs. That bastard did your father, he's about an hour, just screaming at me. Finally, I just pushed her out of the way and left. I can't remember a good time in my life growing up. So I'm certain there was something somewhere. Why am I trying to tell you this? There was no hope for me for anything. I didn't have money. I didn't have parents who could do anything for me. I didn't have anything. And I've traveled to 56 or 58 countries. Look at the board. That's crazy. That represents hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. I didn't have any money. How in the world did that happen? Well, when I got saved, God started doing things. Now, I got saved after I got married. But thank God, Claudia came into my life because that was a good thing. And, my high school years were horrible, just horrible. If I could do a time machine, I'd go back and change a whole lot of things. But we had a blind date, and we kind of immediately made a connection about some things that we wanted in life. And so we, dated for quite a while and so forth. And then I got married. Well, I was 18 when I got married and turned 19 2 weeks later. My dad had to go down and sign for me, give me permission at the courthouse to get married. Both of us were kind of getting married to get away from the home thing. I know I was. Now, her home wasn't like that, not like mine, but it had its problems that were pretty bad. And I won't go into that unless she wanted to tell you sometime. But there was a little bit of us both kind of finding each other and wanting to just get away from stuff and start a life, something that we could control and that we could deal with and so forth. So I didn't get to finish college, which, when we got married, our parents refused to pay for any more college after that. Said, well, you're married now. And I thought, well, that's the stupidest thing you could have done. Because had we just decided to live together, which is what they did in that day, you'd have had to pay for my college. But we just chose to go ahead and get married. And now you say no. I mean, they had, the money was there. And they just, no. So I didn't, we couldn't make it. We literally couldn't make it. So I, got a job in the computer industry running. I was a computer operator. First computers that I worked on had 16K memory, and it was as big as this room. Honest to God. And it had to have massive air conditioning so that it wouldn't overheat. 16K. Your watch has several gigs. So, and I was in the oil business for a long while, and I got transferred around as a computer operator and stuff, and kids came along and that kind of thing. We ended up back in Tulsa, and my dad said, well, I'll tell you what, he started this little manufacturing company, and it got too big for him to do on a part-time basis, and it needed a lot of help. And so he said, I'll tell you what, if you can move back up here and work and get the manufacturing working for itself and paying for itself, I'll give you the company. So I said, okay. And we moved up there, and of course it was not easy. There's a lot of problems. He was still married to number two. We were living with him for a while. She had moved out, and they were in the process of divorce. She bought a house with his money somewhere not far, and so we're in this house. And my dad and Claudia and I took a trip to Florida for his company. And at that time, she was going to come and collect her things that were hers in the house, while we were gone. Well, we came back and she stripped the house completely bare to the walls. She took every single thing that existed in the house except our property. So we came back to nothing. Again. So anyway, all that stuff transpired, and my dad went through a very bad, deep depression, and as you know, he committed suicide, killed himself. And I was the lucky guy that got to find him in his room with a gun on his chest and his head blown off. So had to deal with that, And so you talk about nothing, we really had nothing at that point. I continued to run the business. After I got saved, which was close around that time before he died, very close before he died, my older brother and two younger sisters hated me, absolutely hated me. They already did anyway. They always thought I was the favorite child for some reason. I never saw a benefit of it. But that's what they thought. And when I got saved, they really hated me. Well, long story short, I got my dad, took him to the evangelist. He got saved. Well, then my dad goes ahead and kills himself. And so when they come back for the service, I said, well, I'm going to get this evangelist to do the service. One of my brother and two younger sisters were irate. They said, we don't want anything to do with this Christian stuff. What do you mean? And I said, well, Dad died a Christian. You know. Well, they finally acquiesced, and, you know, reluctantly, because I was the executor of his estate as well. So they finally just let me do it that way. I had the evangelist, not a pastor. I had an evangelist do his service. So at the service, my brother comes flying in from Fruitville, California. It's called, that's my name for a place. Anyway, he comes in, he's got a Mexican wedding shirt and a bandana around his head. And, you know, he's this hippie guy. And my sisters are all belligerent and kind of, you know, and here we are in the front row in this service, and they're sitting to my left. Preacher's right in front of me, about from here to that pillar. So you go through the whole thing, do all that stuff. And at the end of the thing, my brother said, who was that man standing behind the preacher? I said, there wasn't anybody back there. He goes, oh, yeah. He said it was about 9 feet tall, and he was staring at me, and he was mad. And my sister goes, I saw him too. And I said, well, there wasn't anybody back there that we could see. There's an angel appeared to him. That was the last shot for those hard-hearted, unbelieving, nasty people. That's what they are. I mean, God just went to all lengths to try to get them to change. And they just walked off. Sad. I'd like to see an angel, would you? Well, I'd like to see one that wasn't looking at me that was mad. But if I had a mad angel looking at me, I would stop and wonder what's going on and really look hard. But they didn't. So here we are. We're literally living week to week. We were going in debt. We didn't have enough money to just live on basics stuff. And then I go to church. It's a Methodist church, and this guy is sitting there. He's got a thing up on the wall that's about tithing, and he goes, it says 1%, 3%, 5%, 7, 9, 10, or whatever, and kind of a thing to try to raise up. And he starts talking about tithing. And I'm looking at this, and he's trying to get people to at least start doing something with tithing. Well, you know, I'm a new believer, and I don't understand these things, so I made an appointment to go see him. I said, what is this tithe thing? He goes, well, it's 10% of your income. I said, well, how come you have 1, 3, 5, all that stuff? If it's 10, why don't you have 10? And he just smiled and looked at me and said, son, look, not everybody loves God the way you do. He said, well, you know, just trying to get them to step into this. I said, well, okay. I mean, but so I said, what do I do to tithe? You know, you realize we don't have money every week to meet everything. And now I got to give 10%. I don't have a whole lot of mercy on people that say, well, I can't afford to tithe. Let me tell you something. No one can. So I said, what do I do? He said, well, look, son, this is the way I would do it if I were you. He goes, I have a friend down at the bank. Go see this friend at the bank. Open up another checking account for God's fund. And when you get your paycheck, take 10% and put it in that God's fund checking account, and you keep the other in your checking account, your household account. And then from that one, pay your tithe to the church or whatever, you know, so forth. So I went down there, went to the bank. The person that was there turned me over to somebody else. I said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to open a checking account. They said, well, okay, what's the title of the account? What's the name on the account? I said, God's fund. They said, what? I said, God's fund. Well, my pastor told me come open a checking account called God's Fund. Well, she goes, well, you're going to have to wait a minute. And she goes away and comes back and said, Mr. Ross, I'm sorry, but we don't know who God is, so we can't, put his name on there. We need something else. She said, how about calling it Scott and Claudia Ross's God's Fund? I said, okay, that'll work. Let's do that. I said, well, can you just open the account? Yeah, we'll open the account, but we have a minimum amount of money needed to open the account. You have to put in at least $300. $300, that was my weekly income, honestly. I was making about $300 a week. My God, all of a sudden, I got to empty everything. But I did it. And so we just started, doing our best, and God started moving and saving us money here and there and changing this and changing that. Now, I'm not trying to get your sympathy here. I'm trying to tell you, you don't understand. I came from nothing with no help. And God sent me around the world because the limits came off when I got saved. See? So, I don't go around talking about this stuff. And I'm not happy about doing it right now either. I don't like to talk about it. But you'll understand why I don't have a whole lot of compassion for people who say that they can't do something. I don't have the money. I don't have the. I don't have. Listen. I know what it is to be poor. I grew up under real bad circumstances that way. So I understand. But I understand that that's not the end of the road. So all of a sudden, all things started becoming possible. I told you this story. I used to sit in my basement, and I was told to fast and pray one day a week. My Bible teacher told me to do that. So I started doing it. And I'd go in the basement and had this old torn up chair. It's a basement. Anyway, so I'm praying down there. One night a week I go down by myself and pray and so forth. And then I put a map on the wall for some reason. I don't know why. I have no idea why. I put this map on the wall. Map of the world, kind of like that, but small. And so I started praying and praying and praying. And then all of a sudden, I would fall out in a trance. And I would start seeing myself in these foreign countries, standing before people, teaching them, laying hands on them. And I'd go, what? It started happening so much that I thought I was having some serious problems. And I went to get counseling. Thought, I need help. I'm having these crazy visions of grandeur. I don't know what's going on. So I go to my Bible teacher. I say, let me tell you what's happening here. So I tell him all these things, and he laughs and he laughs and he goes, listen, calm down. He said, that's just God. He's just showing you your future. I said, really? He goes, yeah, don't resist it. Don't fight it. Don't worry about it. So I said, well, okay. Now, some of you may not really understand this, but when I was in Nepal, at one of the times, I think it was Nepal, or it may have been there, one of the trips, I told the people, I was talking to them about how God works and hearing the voice of God and how God moves. And anyway, I said, listen, I told them the story about the basement. And I said, I was here 40 years ago. I've already been here. I was here 40 years ago. And I'm just now catching up. But I've saw myself here in front of you. And now I'm here. And I'm telling you, I'm the least likely guy to ever do that. I grew up in Oklahoma. The borders of Oklahoma are the end of the world. Oklahomans don't go anywhere. Ever. And so my dad, even though he had his problems, he made an offer to the kids. He said, I'll tell you what, if you want to do a semester abroad, I'll pay for half of it if you'll pay for the other half. And so my brother did it. And he went to England, Scotland, anyway, stuff like that. Well, it came my turn. I said, forget it. I don't want to go anywhere. Just give me the money. It would be this amount of money. Just give me the money. I don't want to go anywhere. My sisters did it. No, I don't want to go anywhere. No way. And so I didn't. I'm telling you, I didn't want to go anywhere. Particularly not California. Fruit, flakes, nuts, weirdos, wackos. And I'd say that. I said, man, I never want to go out to that stupid place. Well, guess what? God sent me out there to help start a church in San Francisco. Lived there 3 years. So I learned real quick, never say never. Because that's about the thing that God's going to go, oh yeah? Never? Well, let me tell you. I never want to go anywhere. Okay, you're going to Africa. So I never thought I'd want to change the world. So what happened? God had to start changing my thinking. Because as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And I had corrupt thinking from surviving mentality all of my childhood without any good guidance in life. And so God had to change my way of thinking so that he could bring to me the things that he had for me to do. Because you're transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's not simply the Spirit. We act like God's just going to pick you up and throw you somewhere and say, all right, that's my will. No, that's not how it works. You have to be able to think bigger than where you are and what you're doing. And if you can't, you're going to stay right there. If you're happy with that, no problem. No problem at all. If that's, that's it. Okay, no problem. But he had to start showing me all over the world in prayer. And these weren't mild little dreams, people. These were dreams where I would wake up with a fast heartbeat and sweating. And I was there in spirit. So I started seeing things different. I started seeing myself different. And he started changing me the way I thought. And one day, Claudia and I were at church. We had a spirit-filled church that, moved in the things of the Spirit very well. And I have a vision, an open-eyed vision. Janny Grind is on the piano. I've told you this story. A thing like honey came out of the ceiling down on her head and over her hands and all over the piano. But it wasn't gold. It was pure white, glistening, sparkling. Came down. She started playing the piano by the Spirit and singing. And I was sitting there looking at that going, my God, what is going on here? My eyes are wide open. I start looking at people around here and over there, and no one else seemed like they were seeing anything. And finally, I just thought, well, I better just calm down here and start acting normal. So I just sat there and watched it. And at the end of her song, that thing came back off the piano, back onto her arms, back up here, and then back up and left. I saw the anointing. I saw it. These eyes. I thought, what in the world is going on here? Why? And the Lord spoke to me. He said, you're going to go overseas. I'm going to send you overseas. It's going to take everything you've got, but I'm going to give it back to you. And I thought, oh my God. We were getting ready to build a house. I'd already seen the architect. I had the plans. I had the quote from the builder. I was going to call the builder Monday morning and say, start. And this happens. I'm going to send you overseas, and it's going to take everything you got, but I'll give it back. Wow. So this is going on inside me. So, I'm not a genius, but I'm pretty smart about some things. And I said, well, Lord, let me tell you something. I'm not taking her unless you tell her. I'm not telling her this. I'm not taking her house away. I'm not going to, no. You're going to have to tell her. And he did. And she'll maybe someday relate her experience. She had something happen to her, same service. But man, he had to change my mind. And then, of all places, I land in Jerusalem. Talk about dramatic. I mean, how about someplace like London that speaks English or somewhere like that, But all of a sudden, I'm thrust into the Middle East with wars going on everywhere, where they're shooting at each other in the streets. And I witnessed it. I won't go into all those things, but we were very, very close to many terrorist attacks. Our kids in particular at the school had a very tough one. Several of the terrorists were killed in that. But here I am, I thought, my God. And then I also, looking back, I want to say this. I've often wondered what that whole thing was about. I don't totally understand to this day why I was there. I just absolutely know I was sent. But I think this, he got me away from all the influences that would have destroyed me. My brother, 2 younger sisters, I haven't spoken to them in 25 years at least. They won't talk to me. I've tried to contact, they will not talk to me. So what can you do? But had I stayed around all that, and her parents, and others like that, I would never have walked on with God. When I got saved, and then I told my Christian friends that we were going to move overseas as missionaries, I lost every Christian friend instantly. They no longer would talk to me. They shook their head, turned, walked away, and that was the end right there. It was like, are you kidding me? Who do you think you are? And I was confused. I thought, well, gee, these people I thought would be happy for me. They weren't. So I got separated from all that. And, I spent years, almost 4 years there, studying and doing things, to learn. I learned things that you've never heard from this pulpit. I've got stuff you've never, ever heard. The benefit of being on the ground at the place where the Bible took place gives you stuff that you cannot get in another way. I have covered every single automobile road in that country multiple times. I've been to most every biblical site where David met Goliath, all the stuff, all of it. I was right there. I almost got thrown out of the country because I started fooling around one of the archaeological digs, and I dug up some stuff. That's another story. They threatened to throw me out. And I threatened them right back. Said, you throw me out, I'm going to call the Hasidim and tell them what you're doing. They'll shut you down. He backed off like that. So, but I learned things. The doctrine I have, or what I know, whatever that is, I don't know, is mine. I went to the same school Paul went to. 3 years in Damascus, where the Lord taught me. No one can take credit for whatever I have that's good. I don't know if it's all good. I hope so. But there isn't anybody that can say, oh yeah, I discipled him. I'm not saying you should do that or anybody else should do that. I'm just saying this is what happened to me. Nobody discipled Paul. People think, oh, you can't do that anymore. You got to go get a degree. You got to get this. You got to get that. Yeah, you got to get a degree if God tells you to get a degree. God told Andrew Womack, don't go to college. He was going to college. He thought, well, I need to go. And God said, no, don't. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to college. What you need to do is do what God tells you to do. He knows what he's doing. So, I started learning some things. One of the things, if you remember, Oral Roberts said, he said, if you can see the invisible, you can do the impossible. It's one of the best books I've ever read. If you can see the invisible, you could do the impossible. Well, I lived it. In my basement, when I didn't have enough money to even pay my bills, sat down there, I started seeing the invisible. And I'm standing here almost 50 years later, having done it. But I saw it almost 50 years ago. So, if I could ever get anything across to young people, it would be this message right now. You need to understand how God works. And if you can learn that early, God will take you places you never even thought you could do or go. Whatever his will is for your life. Doesn't mean you're called to the pulpit. I just happen to be. But you see, my future was not determined by my resources. It was determined by the steps. The Bible says the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. In other words, the good man delights in the way of the Lord. And so and there's other scripture, order my steps aright, Lord, and so forth and so on. If you will take the step that you know is in front of you and continue to take this next step, he will do things that you could never even dream. If you'll stay in the process. I'm telling you right now, when I'm gone to heaven, that's what I want you to remember me. He said to stay in the process because that's what happened. I just stayed in the process. Most of my Christian friends are no longer Christian. They left the church, they left the body, they're backslid, they're lost. For some reason, I stayed. For some reason, God did such an indelible work on me when I did get saved that one night that it stuck, and I've gone through hell and back in those years, multiple times. We've lost every single thing we own 3 times. So, if you could ever understand what God looks for is obedience. Now, if you don't apply yourself towards God consistently, you won't know where the steps are. And that's not his fault. You see, now that's the problem, particularly when you're young. It's so easy to get distracted with life, there's so much going on. That's the number one problem with humans. It's a distraction. Let me tell you something. Computers didn't make things simpler. You may argue that point, but what I see is that it's got people so wrapped up that they can't even get their hands off of them right now. Oh, they're having whole classes, a month away from social media to get healed. What in the world has happened? It's all distraction. You were made for one thing, God. Until you know that and pursue that, you're on your own. And some of us will do all right on our own. I'm not saying you can't. Just you can't do what God would want you to do. But my thinking made the limits in my life. So God had to deal with my thinking. You know, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You're transformed by the renewing of your mind. If you can't think bigger, you won't get bigger. You won't have bigger. I get so frustrated because some of my nice little Word of Faith pastor friends, I wish I could take them into the country and have a discussion out there. Or I could slap them around a little bit. They don't think I have any faith for finances. They look at this, they go, well, you just got this little church. You don't believe in the 100-fold return. You don't do this, you don't do that. And I'm telling you something, in more than 20 years, I've never asked God for a dime. I've never prayed for money in 20 years. I've never been anywhere in the world in my entire life or ministry that I didn't first have the money to go there. Every trip paid for in advance. And they say, I'm not living in faith? God, I want to knock their teeth out in the love of Jesus. Shake them loose, man. They're so stinking religious. They don't know it. I just haven't had to pray for money. Years and years and years ago, they used to say, well, bless God, where God guides, God provides. You don't hear that anymore. But it's true. Biggest problem I face with ministers as I minister to them overseas in different ministers' meetings, they're doing things God never told them to do. And they're wasting the money that God's bringing. And you can't convince them of it. Their egos are so huge. They're comparing themselves with other ministries. Well, he's doing this. I want to do that. He's got a school. I want a school. Got to have a magazine. Everybody, you're going to have a magazine. Man, I'll tell you, the stuff that people come up with, they think is God is amazing. And then they turn around and want you to pay for it and condemn you when you don't. I was in one meeting, I won't tell you where it was, and I'll finish here pretty soon. It was a pastor's meeting with a ministry organization, not my pastor now, whole different deal. And they did an honor thing where they brought, money to the head of the organization. Again, not Pastor Barclay. I'm not talking about that. It's another deal. So they had this deal, and they brought all the money and so forth. Well, then after 2 or 3 meetings, this person, the head of it, got up in front of everybody and said, well, we need to get this budget paid for. We need to get this budget paid for. Listen to what she said. She said, I know God has answered my prayer, but you people, and she did that, you people aren't obeying God. Oh, man, I'm going to tell you something. Thank God I was tied to that chair because I would have throttled her. Can you believe that? They told people to bring thousands and thousands of dollars, gave them to her. Now they don't have any money. Now they can't pay the budget. Now it's you people. Whoa. This is the faith camp? These are the faith people that say you can reap what you sow? That's interesting. I wanted to stand up and say, well, I guess you just didn't sow enough seed, did you? Hallelujah. One or two more stories at least. First closing. It was hard for God to change me. It wasn't easy. I was so poor and so in survival mode all of my life. Literally survival. I can't tell you how many times I moved out of my dad's house into my mom, out of my mom's house into my dad, back and forth, off in an apartment with my dad while he was in Madrid as well. I can't tell you how this was. Never had a stable anything. Yeah. But so it's hard for me to see money or good things coming to me. And it's interesting that when, Claudia's had to work a job most of the time, but anyway, so some of her bosses started giving her certificates to restaurants as gifts instead of money. Well, so we had to go. I mean, if you're going to receive the gift, you got to go. Well, they started sending us to restaurants that were all over the place that were just these high-end restaurants, stuff I would never be able to pay for. And we all of a sudden started seeing something a little different. Oh, wow, I kind of like this. I'm starting to see myself here. I can do this. I remember Happy Caldwell telling this story about how he went to Honolulu, Hawaii. He was driving in the car. He's looking up all these massive, beautiful homes overlooking the ocean and stuff. And he said, I can't even imagine living in one of those. And instantly the Lord spoke and said, don't worry, you never will. You're going to think like that? You never will. How you think is critical. And your thinking must change. You are where you are right now because of the way you think right now. So if that's okay, no problem. Honestly, no problem. But if it's not really what you'd like or what you think God's wanting you to do, well, then something has to change. So I know I've been through this process, still going through it. Amen. Well, I think the Lord wants to help some people or person, whoever, whatever. There may be some people here. I mean, I'm sure this spoke to everybody, but I don't want an emotional response. I don't want anybody to just come up here because they feel sorry or sad or that was a touching story or any of that stuff. If you know that this is your issue, not just something you want to change. I mean, this is your issue, then let's minister to you. If you want to come on. If this is your issue. What? Bye-bye.